The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
And I think also to have a podcast, you need to have at least an audience of like your mother. And I don't even think my mother listened to that one, so maybe it doesn't qualify.
My fiance doesn't listen to my show, if that counts.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
This is David Lombardo. We're here with the Capital Confidential podcast, and I'm here with David Klepper of the Associated Press, and we're going to be breaking down a little bit of what's been going on in the state Senate for the last couple weeks. And we brought David in here for starters because, you know, he's been living and breathing this for the AP, but also because he's experienced how other people get their jobs done in the state legislatures. So Dave, you know, where have you served duty for the AP, and what was it like there covering state houses?
Well, David, let me first thank you for having me on. It's my great pleasure to be here. Yes, I have had the privilege of reporting here in New York for the AP, covering the legislature, and before that, for the AP, I was covering the State House in Rhode Island, which is certainly not a state you would look to for an example of government efficiency. Prior to that, I worked for several years covering the State House in Kansas for the Kansas City Star newspaper. So I have seen how different state houses around the country do it, some of the common problems they run into, and some of the ways they choose to do things a little differently.
And have you seen anything like this in Kansas or Rhode Island?
Yeah, you know, frankly, the surprising thing to me is that we don't see this more often in New York. I think stalemates, gridlock, deadlocks, that's kind of, you know, a proud tradition in bicameral legislatures. It was not rare at all to see in Kansas a deadlock over an issue. I remember one long fight over authorizing state-run casinos that in many ways was similar to this. I think what has surprised all of us here in New York is that this usually doesn't happen here. And frankly, I think the fact that this, I'm going to say something a little crazy, I think that the fact that this doesn't happen more in New York is an indictment of our legislative process because it is so controlled by leadership. Very, very infrequently is there a bill that goes on the floor that doesn't pass.
Do you think that's a product of the fact that they have majorities that are really clearly defined?
Yes, I think that's redistricting. I think that's campaign finance. I think that is the total control that the two parties have over their respective chambers.
Now, the incident you mentioned, though, was about an actual issue, casino gambling, whereas the fight we've had for the last couple of weeks has largely been over a procedural issue. It's not been over whether a bill is going to come to the floor. It's been whether an amendment will be accepted on the floor. I mean,
and then who has the right to talk about that amendment?
Right. I mean, are we debating just nonsense here? Is this just about politics? Is this about policy?
Well, of course, you know, I think both sides would say this is about politics and policy, and that you can't have the policy without the politics. But
yeah, I think it was Diane Savino who said on the floor, you know, if you think that what we do here isn't driven by politics, you're crazy.
Right. I mean, this is fundamentally a political place, and it's always amusing to me when people are like, oh, they're playing politics. Well, that's like saying the Yankees are playing baseball. That's what they do.
It shouldn't be a surprise.
It should not be a surprise. You know, it's always interesting to figure out as a journalist how to cover something like this, because I am of the opinion that the New York City resident on the subway reading his tabloid newspaper on the way home, or the family upstate worried about their education and their taxes, they do not care. And in fact, this kind of stuff turns them off. This is the kind of stuff that makes them say, to heck with everybody in Albany. They can't get anything done. At the end of the day, no one's taxes went up or went down. No one had a new opportunity in education that they didn't have before. Healthcare was not taken away or granted. At the end of the day, nothing happened but a bunch of people in suits arguing about who could talk. I don't think that is, really what people want to see out of their legislatures, but it's how work gets done. I mean, there's the whole thing about watching the sausage get made, and this is basically like a work stoppage in a sausage factory.
So, as a writer for the AP, how do you approach this? And I mean that in the sense that you're not, your audience isn't a highly curated politicos. It's not like some local town. How do you try to begin to cover something like this?
We cover other things.
Okay.
Frankly, I mean, we've written about this. In fact, I just finished a story about the stalemate in the Senate. But people have a limited amount of time in their day, and especially these days, there's so much news coming at them. It's like a fire hose. And I think it's one of my responsibilities to pick and choose what is the most relevant, important, insightful information that people need to know to lead their lives and understand their government. So I've been writing about other things going on. We have written about the Senate deadlock, but I'm not going to write the every little twist and turn. Did you hear what this senator said about this senator not saying anything? I don't think people really want to read about that.
So no breathless TikTok coverage
No.
of all the constant spin and everything?
No. We've been writing about, what does this mean in terms of, does this mean that sports betting will come to a vote or won't come to a vote? Does this mean that the tax extenders that many, many towns rely on will get approved or will not get approved? I've been trying to figure out what this means in the broader context and not get too excited by the palace intrigue.
Not having like a political nerd like breakdown over this?
Well, it's interesting because we have a very robust journalistic climate here in the Capitol. I think we have a lot of different organizations with a lot of different roles to play, and certainly the Albany Times-Union, Politico, because of who they are much more interested and much better at capturing the relevance of the day-to-day activities here, because Albany, this is the capital. Obviously, they have a greater interest in that kind of thing. Politico, that's their bread and butter.
Yeah.
But for someone like the AP, we write copy for radio, for TV, and for print. We try and get to the big picture, the 10,000-foot view, and often this stuff doesn't really explain very much to people.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember your audience because it's easy if you're here. You're talking with your LCA colleagues, and it becomes this really nuanced minutia discussion about, who said what on a hostile amendment, who's, making a procedural gambit. And I know myself, as I'm trying to write some of these stories for print that, are 800, 1,000 words in some cases, I try not to get bogged down in just putting a chronological narrative. It's just, what do people actually need to care about from this? What's the most interesting thing? And I think that's where I really benefit from having a state editor to work with me on this stuff. But
yeah, I think that's exactly the way we should be handling it.
And I unfortunately don't always follow through with that. But, moving forward now, do you think that this is going to have ramifications for the final days of session? I mean, there's only 2 weeks left, and you mentioned there are substantive issues like sports gambling, which I love to cover. They'll need to be resolved. Do you think this is going to have an effect moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think it will clearly have an effect on how the session ends. One thing that we haven't necessarily talked about is that I don't think the Senate enjoys this either.
No.
And I think they want to get out of here as soon as possible. It's campaign season, and it's the summer, and they have families, and I think they want to get out of here. And if anything, I think this probably encourages them to set aside their differences and do what has to be done, and then get out of town.
And we haven't really touched on this, but the gridlock stems from the fact that one of the senators who gives the Republicans a majority is just not in town. He's away on active military duty, and we don't know, when his ship's going to sail back to here. Although actually, I hear he's not actually abroad. I hear he's still in the States doing training. But I mean, is this a way to govern, waiting for somebody to return to do their job? It's just like, have you seen anything like this before?
This is actually a unique experience to my knowledge. I have seen in states where the governor would send out the state police to collect lawmakers that weren't there for votes.
I wonder if that's a possibility.
We'd have to ask Governor Cuomo, because
send the sergeant at arms out.
It depends on, I suppose, what Governor Cuomo thinks about this situation, this stalemate in the Senate.
Well, I wonder. You mentioned Governor Cuomo, whether he likes this chaos, because he's for years he's gone on the position that he's made Albany work. He's made the Senate Republicans work with the Assembly Democrats. now they're trying to push the Senate Republicans out, he can say, look, there's dysfunction with the
Yep.
Senate Republicans.
I think you're right. I think this plays right into his narrative and gives him more cover for his attempt to give the Senate over to the Democrats. And I think from a legislative standpoint, he has always thrived on legislative chaos because he is very organized, very disciplined, very aggressive, and he can often divide and conquer and use the chaos in either the Assembly or the Senate to his advantage.
So, as a reporter covering this, are you getting a lot of spin? I mean, are you hearing constantly from communications people on both sides of the aisle, or are they just letting you kind of do your own thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, depending on the day, a spokesman for one or the other of these two factions will say, oh, my gosh, can you believe what the other side did? And can you believe this? And this is huge, and this is unprecedented. And I have to explain to them, well, when something happens, let me know. Because I can't just write a story every day being like, nothing happened. A lot of gnashing of teeth over the Senate rules. I think, you go outside and you ask the average person walking down the street in Albany, which building is the state capitol? I mean, I've done that. And people don't even know.
Oof.
So when people in Albany, I had a delivery guy who was supposed to bring something to the office. He didn't know where the state capitol was. He lives in Albany. So when people don't even know where the state capitol is, I think the inside baseball of the state Senate is largely irrelevant to them.
And, how do you decide as a reporter who covers on this how to frame certain things? So, for instance, the big fight the last 2 weeks has been over the amendments the Democrats want to push on Reproductive Health Act and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Care Act.
Yeah.
And they're arguing that what we've seen, the vote that we had on the amendment, is tantamount to Republicans voting against those bills. When you frame these stories, do you say that that's what just happened, or do you say Republicans voted against a procedural process thing?
I guess I try and do both because that is the perspective. Yeah, and I hate that kind of transcriptive coverage, but sometimes you have to do it. You have to give both sides their say. And I can see the argument from both sides. The Democrats are saying, here's an opportunity to vote on this policy. If you're voting against it, you're voting against it. And the Republicans say, hey, we're in charge of this chamber. There is a process by which bills are done. It would be no different if the Democrats were in charge and we were trying to push our bills. This is how the procedure works. The party in power always points to procedure and, take it through the committee process. And the party that's out of power always, says that they're being trampled upon. And I think both sides have a right to make their case. At the end of the day, though, if the Democrats get this amendment on and the Republicans say, well, the bill will never come to a vote, then what have we accomplished?
Not much. And, you talk about the he said, she said part of, journalism. Is this one of the challenges that, maybe has become harder to deal with the lack of sort of trust in the media, where you might have said, okay, I can, I have X amount of experience, years of experience in journalism, and, I know what just happened, and I can, say with some authority what happened. Are you less likely to sort of assert that authority when people don't trust the media? Are you then more inclined to say, here's what so-and-so said, here's what X said, or does that not really enter the calculation?
Well, I think it's interesting. In the last couple of years, I feel like we've seen sort of a split. There have been some media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, who have been much more sort of authoritative in what they say about like the president. Mm-hmm. If he says something that seems to contradict something he said the day before, 10 minutes before, they'll just come out and say it was a falsehood, and they're very authoritative in that in a way that I have not seen. I think you kind of have to do that to help people understand Albany. You have to sort of rely on your own experience as a way of helping people understand the significance of things. One thing I love about the AP is we're very black and white, very factual. We try and strip out adjectives. We try and simply say this happened today, and this is what comes next, and this is who did it, and this is why they did it according to them. We try and play it very straight and keep out, interpretation or analysis, or if we do a little bit of analysis, label it clearly as such. So I try and stay away from that stuff just because, I don't think people, my opinion or my experience is valuable, but my opinion, people don't want to know that.
Is it hard to sort of stick to those guidelines of no adjectives, really stripping it down, or are you used to it at this point?
I guess I'm used to it at this point. And my friends would probably tell you that it's interfered with my personal life too, and then now I'm like that in the way I deal with humans.
Like robotic, or like on the one side A, on the other side B? Or?
Factual and rational.
Does
That's
that
what I strive for.
impact your love life? I know my fiance likes to say that I'm a robot sometimes. I mean, do you get that same sort of criticism?
I'm going to try and stay as far away from talking about my
you
love
make a
life
good
on
point,
state government.
But B, okay.
Yes,
all right.
yes, exactly. There's always another side to be argued.
Yes, no, that's fair enough. And, I guess while this has been happening in the Senate, things are business as usual in the Assembly,
Yep.
where it's just firing right along with a 100-seat majority, 100-seat party. What do you expect from them? Is there just a reason we never see this from that side because they have such a large majority?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason why you didn't see this in the Senate until very recently. I mean, the Senate right now, because of Senator Croce's absence, the Democrats are showing that they can shut the place down if they want to. And I think that's what's going on here. It's a shot across the bow. It's basically we have the number. We are no longer such a small minority that we can't do this.
So we've said essentially that a lot of what's been going on in the state Senate either is going to annoy people because they don't like this dysfunction, or they just have no sort of awareness of what's going on. And I think both sides are gambling, though, that what's been happening is going to pay off for them in November, whether it's Democrats thinking that they've put vulnerable Republicans in a tough spot, or whether it's Republicans thinking that they've shown that Democrats can't actually lead a chamber or can't be part of a productive government.
Well, I think they're operating in an environment in which the headwinds are kind of largely beyond their control. A lot of national stuff from Washington is going to affect the turnout and the results of this election in a way that one day of gridlock or a week of gridlock isn't really going to push through to the public consciousness. Another thing is I know a lot of Republicans who, if you tell them the legislature has gotten nothing done, they would say, great.
Yeah.
So I think the Republicans could probably walk away tomorrow and say the session's over, and their base would say, there's nothing wrong with that. The government that governs lease is the government I want. Right. But they also know it's not quite that simple, that this, like all elections, will be an election for the moderate middle. And those people want a government that functions, that can invest in schools and improve the bureaucracy and address corruption and all those other things.
And I think when you say, a Republican voter might be fine with what's happening, I think the problem, the challenge for Senate Republicans is that the Republicans don't make up a majority for the most part.
Right.
And a lot of these districts in Long Island, in the Hudson Valley, they have to appeal to these more moderate voters who you're saying have a certain agenda in mind, have a certain viewpoint, and that's one of the things where I think is why we're seeing this standstill, because you've got these potentially seats that are up for grabs, whether there's because of retiring senators like John Bonasek in the Hudson Valley, Tom Croce, we've mentioned in Long Island, really put these races at play, and I think that's probably contributed to the climate here, because I don't think that this sort of atmosphere would be in 2017, in an odd year when we've still got another year to go. I just can't imagine this sort of fighting going on.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's a very good point to make, that what we're seeing is an ascendant Democratic caucus that feels emboldened and feels like they're going to take over in November, and a Republican conference that is doing whatever it can to hold on to power and try and avoid alienating those moderate voters.
All right, Dave, so before I let you go, is there any reason to expect that now with our 31-31 tie, there's going to be just some great kumbaya moments in the state Senate where it's bipartisan this, bipartisan that?
I don't know. I was telling a Senate staffer the other day, I'm like, which Senate are we going to get today, the Dr. Jekyll or the Hyde? And he's like, well, which one's the mean one? So it's just day to day here. But, they've only got 2 weeks left. I don't see any enthusiasm for staying late. So they got to do kumbaya at some point.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So this is David Lombardo with the Poozer Politics podcast. Nope, that's my old show. Whoops.